Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 24th of June 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today in the studio, Patrick Henningsen from 21st Century Wire. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We'll start off with the Tory leadership. And there's Boris Johnson and, who is that? He's eminently forgettable.
Jeremy Hunt?
Jeremy Hunt, yes.
Do you really want to talk about these guys again?
No, we don't. We're not going to.
Just skip it.
Just skip it.
Yeah.
Let's move to the Middle East and to Turkey. And let's start with this because the Gezi Park protest trial is now taking place. So 16 civil society leaders, you might call them, are being prosecuted. This trial begins today in the Silvestri prison complex outside Istanbul. The suggestion is it's going to be 5 days, but perhaps it might only be 2 because there's going to be another hearing on the 27th of June. So these 16 people are facing life imprisonment without parole for allegedly organising and financing the 2013 Istanbul Gezi Park protests. The indictment is 657 pages long. It claims that the mass protests began, that they were deliberately orchestrated as part of an international plot against Turkey. Does that seem like a reasonable description of what took place?
I think that's there might be some partial truth in that, Mike, but there is also a genuine organic grassroots aspect to these protests. You have to remember this was coming right on the sort of back end of the Arab Spring. So this would have been probably in May and June, building up in May and June of 2013. And so that was kind of the end of the Arab Spring kind of wave that started in 2011. So there was massive grassroots participation and support in this. Now, how it was sparked off, Mike, and the various ways it was organized and supported via NGOs and built up in the Western press, there could be some truth in that. And so it's no surprise, Mike, that Western NGOs are absolutely intimately involved in these sort of efforts, be it, Mike, in the Ukraine with the National Endowment for Democracy or in Egypt. A number of NGOs have been kicked out of Egypt after the Arab Spring because of allegations of this type of involvement. But also we have similar things all right across the world, from in Hong Kong, even accusations of this. Russia as well has booted a number of Soros-linked NGOs, and Soros-funded NGOs. So yes, there could be some truth in this, but I think there's a hybrid explanation.
Okay. Well, let's just remind ourselves that there has been pretty heavy pressure on so-called civil society organizations in Turkey following the coup attempt in 2016. And so what is that, about 1,500 non-profit organizations and foundations have closed their doors as a result of state of emergency decrees following that. But, you're talking about grassroots. I'm not disagreeing with you in any way, but we should look at the people that are being prosecuted here, because amongst those is the former head of Open Society's Turkey Foundation, also his predecessor at Open Society Istanbul office, and it was Open Society Foundation who had something to say about this. This is Patrick Gaspard, who's the president of the Open Society Foundation. The charges in this case follow a political script that seeks to silence all critical voices in Turkey. Is that fair?
This is the thing, Mike. When we're talking about Turkey, this is an incredibly complicated situation. So actually, what Patrick Gaspard is saying here, there is partial truth in this. This government, the Erdogan government, the APK-led Erdogan regime, has been absolutely brutal in jailing journalists, suppressing opposition newspapers, throwing journalists in jail, any critical voices against the government. This is true, but at the same time, Open Society has been involved in subterfuge right across the board globally for many, many years. This is kind of a fifth column, a sort of non-governmental fifth column that's used to great effect right across Eastern Europe and in a lot of different countries. So both sides, there's some truth in what both sides are saying in this, Mike. So, but I think because Turkey is such a complicated situation, you do have a sort of authoritarian type regime in Turkey. very Islamist as well. You have this Islamist versus secular fissure in Turkey. This is very real. So can an open society go in and exploit that fissure, that crack between the secular parts of society and the Islamists? Yes, they can. Are there people in Turkey that would like to exploit those divisions in order to polarize society? Yes, there are. Are there people on both sides of that divide that want to take power? Absolutely. So there you have a perfect cocktail for sort of unrest, as it were.
Okay, well, Gaspard went on to say, yet the 16 defendants are people who want the best for their country in different ways. They've worked to make Turkey a better place for all citizens. That they're now on trial facing possible life sentences is a tragedy. So the question in my mind is, at what point does this become outside interference when you have the likes of Open Society Foundation and other NGOs of a similar bent going into countries and doing what? It's an interesting situation. I'm going to be watching this trial very closely to see what happens at this point. But it's clear that there's been quite a pushback from quite a number of countries against these organisations.
Yeah, the problem is, although there are people who are want to do good things in some of these NGOs, they're not absolutely full of criminals, staffed from top to bottom with criminals. There's people who have very good intentions and they want to implement better sort of legislation and better equal rights and human rights in countries. But the problem is, open society, the reputation precedes them because of their active involvement in so much destabilizing activity across the world. So they're going to be put in the crosshairs, even if the entire operation in that country is of absolutely pure virtue and the best intentions. They're still going to be in the crosshairs. They can't get around that. George Soros is a spent force in many ways. In the United States State Department, like I said before, the U.S. military, the CIA, have used these NGOs as a fifth column, as a Trojan horse in so many different countries that I actually feel sorry for good people working for some of these organizations, because there's no way that they can escape that legacy. It's very difficult.
Okay, let's move on to Yemen and interestingly enough, Iran as well. Now, last week we mentioned the fact that there had been a court case in the UK which is now preventing the government from issuing any more licenses for arms sales to Saudi Arabia. And well, a few days later, the UK government, alongside US, Saudi, UAE, have issued a statement on Yemen. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, the United Kingdom, and the United States of America express their concern over escalating tensions in the region, that's Yemen, and the dangers posed by Iranian destabilizing activity to peace and security both in Yemen and the broader region, including attacks on the oil tankers on the 12th of May in the Gulf of Oman on the 13th of June. So
they're blaming Iran right there.
Absolutely. We further note with concern the recent escalation in Houthi attacks on Saudi Arabia using Iranian-made and facilitated missiles and unmanned aerial vehicles. We express full support for Saudi Arabia and call for an immediate end to such attacks by the Iranian-backed Houthis. So this is a clear declaration by the UK alongside the US and the UAE. And in the light of that court case last week, I think this, to my mind, this can only be a response to that. We are absolutely in support, the British government that is, of Saudi Arabia and everything that they are doing in Yemen.
Look at this. They're losing it over the Houthis using a $2,000 drone to attack a Saudi pipeline. Meanwhile, the U.S., Britain, Saudi Arabia piled in, spent billions of dollars carpet bombing Yemen for 4 years. And they're throwing up these joint statements about, oh, we're concerned about the Houthis' attacks in Saudi Arabia. They've only managed to do it a handful of times. Meanwhile, for 4 straight years, Yemen, one of the poorest countries, Mike, in the world, has been pounded by some of the richest, most powerful countries in the world. None of this makes sense. And it's laughable when they issue a statement like this. It's actually unbelievable.
Now, just across the channel from Yemen is Sudan. And I think you want to just give a little bit of background on what's going on in Sudan at the moment, because this is something that the British media doesn't cover very much, but absolutely is relevant to what's going on with Yemen and with Iran.
Well, a lot of people aren't aware, Mike, that there's been massive events happening in Sudan. And just to give you a little refresher course here, this is a map of Sudan. So as you can see, this is right on the Red Sea, right across from Saudi Arabia, with Eritrea and Ethiopia to the south. You have to remember that it was partitioned in 2010, so that South Sudan is two countries effectively. That was a little bit of a victory by the CIA to slice that country in two. But there are sort of oil reserves as well in the south. Those are now cut off from the sea. It's financed by Saudi Arabia in many different ways. We'll show you one of the most important ways in a minute. But so that's where it is geographically, right below Egypt. Very important country in terms of Africa, and it's right on top of the entry point really to this Sahel region, which is very important geopolitically, which we've talked about on this show many times before. But let's look at what's been going on in 2019. There have been massive protests. So remember how much media coverage the Arab Spring got, Mike? You remember in 2011? It was wall-to-wall coverage. Every single network, every single newspaper. Where have you seen any coverage of the popular uprising in Sudan?
Nowhere.
Almost nowhere. It's as if it didn't happen. And meanwhile, this has been going on pretty much since January. This is when the movement really started to rumble. And so you can see a popular protest here. This is just one of many scenes in Sudan. And so moving on from here, this is what's happened to some of the protesters, Mike. This particular protester here was burnt while they're inside their tents, so that they were camping in a sit-in in a major public area. And the military government now has come in, and I'll show you who they've replaced in a minute, but this is what they've been doing to the protesters. So absolutely brutal in their sort of crackdown. So they've managed to overthrow a dictator only to get a kind of brutal military transitional council in here. And this is what they've been doing, and backing mobs as well, maybe paid mobs perhaps. But here's a video here. You can see this guy, poor guy here, he was in the protests, I guess, and he was burned when he was inside of a tent. And so we'll go show you a little more of the history of this in a minute, but it's really, really sad. This is just one of many, by the way, many sort of brutal things that we've seen in the reportage here.
And what we've got to always remember is that this is one of the key destinations for UK aid from the Department for International Development. And only a week or so ago, the British government, again unreported, produced a press release basically saying that they're very concerned about what's going on in Sudan, and we're very keen to see a civilian government put in place very, very quickly. But what are they doing? They're pumping aid into this country, and this is the type of result.
Well, this is what look at this. This is basically bodies that have been fished out of the Nile River, Mike, with cinder blocks tied to them. So someone's taken protesters here and thrown them into the river with bricks tied to their feet. This is the sort of thing that's going on in the last couple of weeks and months in Sudan. It's absolutely horrific. There's so many examples of this, by the way, if you actually go and drill down into the reporting. And so we're not hearing anything about this. Imagine, the uproar in Syria. You remember in 2011, Bashar al-Assad is shooting peaceful protesters. We found out that wasn't actually the case later. But the media uproar, we've seen none of this with regards to Sudan. And so this is the president who was ousted. This is Omar al-Bashir. This is the man that everybody wanted to string up over the last sort of, I would say, 10 years. And so his allegations against him are many. He's been indicted by the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and under accusations of corruption, human rights abuses, and of course genocide, speaking specifically with regards to the Darfur massacres in the early 2000s. He was ousted pretty much in April 2019. So Bashir out. So this is normally a good thing, right, for the people of Sudan? A positive thing? Well, not quite, because the supposed evil dictator that everybody, including George Clooney, was campaigning for years to oust, has been replaced by this is just one of the military strongmen, Mohammed Hamdan Dalgo, Hamedi is his nickname. He is the former head of the Janjaweed militias that were ravaging Darfur in 2003. He's part of the Transitional Military Council. And as you can see, they've been fingered and responsible for a number of these massacres, killing civilians. The worst, Mike, 100 protesters massacred by this group. I'll show you a little bit more about him, but people say, and this is a quote from him at the bottom here, people say Hamedi is too powerful. He speaks of himself in the third person, powerful and evil, but it's just scaremongering. My power comes from the Sudanese people. So a classic strongman, here he is. And where does he actually get his power from? Maybe it's not from the Sudanese people, Mike. Maybe it's from a neighbor just across the Red Sea. And now, remember the Janjaweed. This was always in the press. You heard of all these stories when the Darfur crisis was going on. The Janjaweed were killing Africans. So there's a bit of a sectarian racial element to this, Janjaweed being Arab Sudanese, and then you have sub-Saharan or black Africans. So there's a kind of a racial sectarian schism in Sudan. And so the Janjaweed militias were operating outside of the law, killing and massacring and so forth. Okay, they've been rebranded. No longer the Janjaweed, they've changed their name. They're now called the Rapid Support Forces.
Excellent.
Great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Commanded by Hamedi, who we just showed you a minute ago. And so they're now massacring protesters. And so it gets even more interesting. Well, let's look at this. General al-Burhan and General Hamdan is Hamedi, who we just showed you before, have a close working relationship with the Saudi and Emirati leadership since at least 2015. That's when the Yemen war started. Very important year. So having been directly involved in the Saudi-led war in Yemen, General al-Burhan has been overseeing Sudan's more than 10,000 ground troops in Yemen. 10,000 ground troops. These troops have included thousands of militiamen from guess who?
Right. So let me understand this, Patrick. We're told that Yemeni war is a proxy war. We've got Iran supporting the Houthis. It's a proxy war. But what you seem to be presenting here is evidence showing that Saudi Arabia is using Sudanese fighters on the other side.
They've subcontracted all of their ground troops to the Sudan. Okay, so in the Rapid Security Forces, the Janjaweed are also some of the same people. And so they're cycling them back, and I'll show you how this sort of works. But okay. It's headed by General Hamedi, the same person. So let's look at how, so you have Mohammed bin Salman in the middle here, Mike.
Right.
He's paying for the Sudanese to fight in the Yemeni war. He's paying for them to go and kill Yemenis, basically, with our weapons, basically, and our air cover, and so forth. So it doesn't get any worse than this as a story, okay? Now, y'all, before we advance, Mike, I just want to remind you that when the Arab Spring was put down in Egypt in June 2013, around the same time as the Turkish protest was going on, that was going on in Egypt, okay? Sisi comes to power. He's now a military dictator in Egypt. He came to power with massive support from guess who? Saudi Arabia and the UAE. So now the people have risen up in Sudan, they've taken their dictator down, and guess what? Saudi and the UAE are backing the military strongman again in Sudan. Do we see a pattern developing here? Okay, let's look at this. Now, just to give people a little bit of geography here. So there's Sudan. So what's happening here? Essentially, the Sudanese troops being sent to Saudi Arabia and then shipped into Yemen to fight the poorest country in the Middle East, Yemen, the peasants of Yemen. So there's a war going on in Yemen, and for that, there's money being exchanged. And I'll bet you not a lot of it's going to the soldiers, I can tell you that right now. A lot of it's going into the pockets of people like Hamedi, and others, and corrupt officials there in the Sudan. And by the way, Bashir has been overseeing this, Mike, since 2015 as well. So there's really no difference in terms of the power change. So that's the real story of what's going on in Sudan. So what's going on in Sudan is so important, because it encapsulates everything that's wrong with the region, and it's absolutely connected to Yemen, 100%.
Okay, well let's get back onto Iran then for a second, and here is the Oxford Research Group, and their headline is "Confronting Iran: The British Dimension." So what have they got to say? Well, let's have a look. They say the posture of the British armed forces in and around the Persian Gulf means it would be very difficult for the United Kingdom or its key ally Oman to remain neutral in any military escalation of the conflict between Iran and the United States. Well, that's very interesting, and we'll see why it's interesting in a second. Just as an aside, I wanted to just mention who the Oxford Research Group is, because they seem to be becoming quite prolific in the last couple of months, and we're seeing more and more comment from them appearing. Well, this is the people they have as their patrons. Dr. Scilla Elworthy, well, of course, she is the founder. Dr. Hans Blix, remind me who he is?
He used to be, I believe, the head UN weapons inspector.
Right.
With regards to Iraq and the WMDs, and so that's how he became famous.
Okay, and Archbishop Desmond Tutu are the patrons there.
And nobody dislikes Desmond Tutu, right? You can stick his face on any organization
and give it credibility.
It's a great PR move, no matter what.
Right. Well, just so that we understand who Scilla Elworthy is, she was advisor to Peter Gabriel, Desmond Tutu, Richard Branson when they set up the Elders. Now, the Elders, some people will have heard of this, many won't. This is a so-called independent group of eminent global leaders brought together by Nelson Mandela, who offer their collective influence and experience to support peace building, help address major causes of human suffering, and promote the shared interests of humanity. That's what they say they do.
A lot of corporate bosses in that group as well. So.
And she's also a member of the World Future Council, so she's all about the future of the world. But anyway, getting back to Iran for a second, Jeremy Hunt had this to say this morning: "We will stand by the United States as our strongest ally, but of course we have to consider any request for military support on a case-by-case basis." Now, this is being presented by a potential future Prime Minister. This is being presented in the mainstream press as him supporting the US, so that he would in fact bring Britain into conflict in Iran. I'm not quite sure that he's quite so sincere about that, or he's quite so determined about that. But nonetheless, an interesting comment. In the meantime, in the United States, pressure building on Trump over this. So here is Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. They published this memo a few days ago on the Information Clearinghouse. And this is what they had to say. We are concerned that you are about to be mousetrapped into a war with Iran. We have serious doubts about Secretary Pompeo. It's clear to us that he has his own agenda, and we know from our own experience with him that his agenda is not always the same as yours. Now, this is quite an interesting document from pretty serious people, Patrick, and again, it seems to be presenting the idea that effectively there's more than one government in the United States at the moment. There's a president who has some people around him, and those people seem to be running different policy agendas in some cases. And when, for example, we discussed last Monday the issue of the alleged cyber attacks on Russia, and the fact that Trump had not been informed about this. So there seems to be some shenanigans going on within the Trump administration, and VIPs are certainly highlighting that. They went on to say, Pompeo's behavior betrays a strong desire to respond with military force, perhaps even without your express approval, to Iranian provocations, real or imagined. He is a neophyte compared to his anti-Iran partner, John Bolton, whose decades-long dilettante approach to interpreting intelligence, strong advocacy for the misbegotten war in Iraq, and his own aggressive agenda are a matter of record. And so the language they're using is quite strong. They're pretty determined to present to Trump their absolute opposition to any war with Iran, and to present to him a suggestion, or to reinforce to him a suggestion, that he perhaps needs to take some care about the people he has around him.
They also called Mike Pompeo a neophyte, meaning he's inexperienced. I absolutely agree with this. Mike Pompeo is not qualified to be the U.S. Secretary of State. He served as a congressman. He did a few terms in Congress, and he's got no diplomatic experience whatsoever. Trump made him head of the CIA, I don't know, for 6 months or whatever he was for a year. And that was probably, Mike Pompeo is clearly a yes man. So that he's only got these positions because whoever's barking the orders, he'll just nod his head and say yes.
And the question at the moment is, who is he saying yes to?
Well, he's probably saying yes to some of the more extreme ends of the Pentagon and the intelligence services, or the neoconservative factions within Washington. So that seems to be, and Israel as well. This seems to be who Mike Pompeo is aligned with. He has no experience. He shouldn't be Secretary of State. So, and he's done a horrible job so far. Probably he will go down in history. Mike Pompeo will go down in history as the worst Secretary of State in the history of the U.S.
That's saying something, bearing in mind who the last administrations.
Worse than Hillary Clinton. I think he'll go down as probably the worst in history. He's really, I mean, his performance has been abysmal so far. So.
Well, let's continue with the two governments theme then, Patrick. So what's going on here?
Well, this is the question. Are there two governments in the United States? We talked about this on the Sunday Wire on the broadcast last night. And you've alluded to this just before, that there's parallel agendas going on. This is what the VIPS memo has been highlighting. And this is an interview with Chuck Todd from NBC. This is Donald Trump here, and he says, incredible quote, "I have two groups of people," says Trump. "I have doves and I have hawks. John Bolton is absolutely a hawk. If it was up to him, he'd take on the whole world at one time." Okay, says Trump to Chuck Todd. So clearly, what Donald Trump is basically alluding there to, Mike, is that there are more than one faction in Washington, in the White House, and the president is struggling with this. So effectively, you could say we have two governments in the U.S. It's specifically from a foreign policy point of view. It's clear.
Now, the comment that most people who want to be critical of Trump make is, well, he appointed them. And my question is, what is the pool that he has access to of people that he could potentially appoint? And is this really the best that he could do?
It's not, but it's a very small pool that Trump can appoint to. There's a reason for this. If you remember when Trump was sworn into office, that's when the Steele dossier came in. Russiagate was being ramped up. Not long after that, the Mueller investigation kicked in, and so it was just nonstop. Russia, accusations of him colluding with Putin and so forth. So Trump was on the back heels. Nobody wanted to serve in his cabinet. Nobody wanted to go in front of Senate confirmation hearings. I mean, Rex Tillerson, what they did to him during the hearings was unbelievable. After everyone watched the lynching of Rex Tillerson during the confirmation process, who would want to go through that? The media lynched them. The Senate lynched them. Everybody wanted to just kill. So half of Trump's cabinet appointments were vacant, Mike. 2 years into the administration, so many vacancies because nobody wanted to serve under Trump. A lot of people thought he wasn't going to survive the first term, and B, they just didn't want to be dragged through the media and through Washington and had their lives picked apart and defamed and slandered and so forth. So, and hence the pool, Mike, was extremely small. So, waiting in the wings were a bunch of Jurassic warhawks like John Bolton, and they absolutely just waltzed right in there. And guess what? We know the mainstream media love war. They love the neocons. There's a bipartisan consensus, a militaristic bent in Washington and America. So they absolutely welcomed Bolton with open arms because they knew they could get a war on, basically. The Democrats didn't have anything bad to say as well because Israel backs Bolton. Sheldon Adelson backs Bolton. So absolutely fine from a Democrat and Republican side. No resistance whatsoever for these appointees. For that very reason that they're in perfect stead with the Israeli lobby, with Tel Aviv, with Netanyahu, with the U.S. media, with the defense industry. Perfect. So, but that's a very small pool of people, Mike. This is a radical minority of neocons that are occupying some of the top positions in the Trump administration. That's my explanation of why we're at where we're at today.
Okay, well, let's just finish this section with this from RT. They tried hard but failed. Iran foiled all US attempts to carry out cyber attacks.
What do you think of this story? Do you think this really happened? This is the cyber revenge by the United States against the Iranians for shooting down the unmanned drone just a couple of days ago, Mike. Did this really happen? Do the Iranians have their missile defense systems hooked up to the internet? We're meant to believe they do. And you spoke about the Russian story last week. We covered that the U.S. have taken down or cyber attacked against the Russian power grid. They've unleashed cyber gremlins into the Russian infrastructure. And we're meant to believe that. We have no way to prove that this actually happened, or if it happened, how effective it was. Did it actually interrupt any of their systems? We have no idea to know. This is the beauty of cyber, Mike. There's no audit trail. There's no accountability. But you can better believe that these stories make headlines, Mike. The firms and the contractors and those departments
making big bucks.
And the budgets are growing and growing and growing. Cyber security is the new gold right now in terms of the security industrial complex. But there's actually no way to tell how productive or effective it is. But I'll bet you it's very profitable.
Okay, now wheat is a weapon.
This is a very disturbing story, but at the same time, it's really important in understanding what's going on right now with Syria. In fact, what's been going on for the last few years, really since even 2012. So wheat is a weapon. So this is a story. This was in the gray zone. The author here is Ben Norton. Wheat is a weapon. U.S. government-funded Democrat-linked think tank proposes starving Syrian civilians to weaken Assad. And so this is an analyst at a think tank bankrolled by the United States government and NATO who has an idea: use wheat as a weapon to starve Syria's civilian population. And they go on to say wheat is a weapon of great power in the next phase of the Syrian conflict, insists Nicholas Harris, a fellow at the Center for New American Security. Great title for a think tank. Washington can pressure its Kurdish allies, who are currently occupying northeastern Syria, by the way, and restrict the country's food supply into food going into the normal part of Syria, and Harris argues, to apply pressure on the Assad regime through, and by extension, through the regime on Russia to force concessions. So you can see they're talking about basically occupying northeastern Syria, restricting food going into Syria to make bread. Of course, wheat's very important as a staple. So let's look at this and see how does this sort of play out. Well, look at this story, Mike. This was a couple of weeks ago. Mystery crop fires scorched thousands of acres in Syria and Iraq, including wheat. And ISIS claims responsibility.
Of course.
Isn't that amazing? So can you put these two stories together, and it gets very interesting. But this is really what people need to understand. Looking right now from 2017 to 2019, you see the yellow part. That's northeastern Syria. That's north of the Euphrates River. So right now, this is where a lot of the wheat is grown in Syria, the food production, but also, Mike, the oil. This is where Syria's oil has been. Okay, who is controlling this right now? This is being occupied by the United States military and the Kurds, or the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. So can you see what's going on here? This is what Syria is about. This is what the U.S. policy is about. It's about starving the red area, keeping food and fuel from getting there. Plus, they have an embargo and sanctions covering any imports of oil or anything into Syria. And so they want to raise the price of staples and basic goods and services. Okay, now look at this map. Let's just backtrack a little bit. Let's go back to this time, Mike, 2013 to 2017. Who was occupying that yellow area at that time? Well, it was ISIS. So effectively, ISIS handed this over to the United States. So this occupation, this starving of Syria of food and fuel, has been going on since 2013. And the United States and the Kurds are now doing the job ISIS did just a couple of years ago. It's right there. It's clear as day. Okay, and any analyst who's not seeing this, this is the main, most important part of the story. They want to strangle Syria to get regime change by hook or crook, even if it takes them 10 more years. And they're going to do this through sanctions, embargo, and occupying a third of the country militarily through the US and these Kurdish proxies. Is it going to work? Are they going to be able to continue doing this, and for how long? That's the big question.
Okay. Okay, now if you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can join us. We'd be very pleased to have you, and of course your financial support is very much appreciated and needed. So please head over there if you would like to support us, and if you'd like to support Ian R. Crane as well, you can get hold of the AV10 DVDs box set, still available on the UK Column shop and still at the discounted price until, for about another week or so. So do pick up a set if you haven't already. Right, now let's head over to the censorship issue. And, well, Mr. Clegg, of course, is working for Facebook now, and he was on Radio 4 Today programme this morning. They were very excited to tweet this out, so let's have a listen to a little bit of what he had to say.
Yes, Facebook has a heavy responsibility to protect the integrity of elections from outside interference. I also think we have a duty to explain fact from some of the allegations that have been made.
Just to be clear, because it may surprise some people, passionate Remainer you are. You
Yes.
wanted that result to go a different way.
Of course.
You are saying that for all those people who may share your view and think that Cambridge Analytica was one reason this referendum was lost by the Remain side, you're saying myth. Not true. Conspiracy theory.
Yes.
So you must be feeling much more secure now, Patrick, in the knowledge that not only did Russia have nothing to do with the United States president, but Russia had nothing to do with Brexit either. So there's absolutely no evidence. So that must make you feel impressed and secure that Facebook's doing a good job.
Yeah, they're doing such a great job of giving us this answer, which we actually knew already. We've known for the last 3 years that Russia wasn't involved in the Brexit vote because we actually know people who actually went out and voted, and they weren't Russian; they were British.
Well,
the same
indeed.
the same in the U.S. election in 2016. So all of our policies in the U.K. and the U.S. are predicated on this fable, this fantasy that the Russians have interfered in our democracy, have interfered in our elections, in Brexit, and in the 2016 elections. And in both cases, Mike, it's completely false. But the policies remain.
Well, you say that. Now, many of the, in fact, the vast majority of the responses to that tweet on the Radio 4 Twitter feed were very skeptical. Yes, of course, Nick Clegg has gone off to work for Facebook. He would say that, wouldn't they? And most of these people absolutely believe and buy into the Russian narrative. The question is, what are these Twitter accounts that were posting this stuff? Are they people, or is there something else going on? Because the top response was this one from Bristol News. I missed the segment where you interviewed Carol Cadwallader, who presented hard evidence that Russia not only attacked the Brexit referendum, but paid for it as well. But who is Carol Cadwallader, and what associations does she have? Well, perhaps this tweet from James Ball. This is from December, 15th of December last year. Carol Cadwallader and James Ball and a bunch of other journalists spoke at other points in the day. At no point was I told what to say or what not to say, and I hadn't even realised it was organised by Integrity Initiative until today. The bits I was there for was an absolutely standard, good quality training day. So what we have here is an acknowledgement from mainstream journalists that in December they were taking part in training days run by Integrity Initiative, and then these same journalists then are producing anti-Russian articles in the press, which, according to this person, provide hard evidence that Russia not only attacked the Brexit referendum but paid for it as well.
No hard evidence was presented at all by Carol Cadwallader. That's a bit of fanciful, that projection.
Absolutely. So what do we have here? We have Nick Clegg as the new face and mouthpiece for Facebook, justifying the censorship agenda, and in fact he went on to say that data analytics from Cambridge Analytica didn't influence the decision to leave. He said that Euroscepticism in Britain goes very deep. Well, of course, that's all true. But he did say that, of course, Facebook was going to require much more regulation.
Because of the Russian meddling.
Well, the Russian meddling
that didn't happen.
Yes, indeed. This was basically his argument. So I just want to take this opportunity once again to remind people that, of course, that regulation is coming. It's coming as a result of the Online Harms White Paper, which is going to produce some legislation later in the year. It's going to produce a regulator for the internet. Britain is going to be the first country in the world to have this type of regulation on the internet, and Facebook is going to be on the receiving end of this. Big fines if these companies don't start censoring, which is effectively what we're talking about.
Censoring.
And so please head over to the UK Column website, ukcolumn.org/censored, and look at the timeline there, understand the process which has brought us to this point today, and get involved. If you haven't yet, put your response on the what's the word?
The online form?
Well, basically, there's a consultation. That's the word I'm looking for. There's a government consultation running on this issue of the Online Harms White Paper. The link is at the end of that page. Go and click on that link and let the government know your thoughts on whether you agree with this type of censorship and this type of regulation of the internet or not.
And if you go to the UK Columns, it's on your website.
ukcolumn.org/censored. That's where you need to go.
/censored.
Yes.
Go there, read the paper, and put your feedback in. This is one of the few opportunities when you can do that. How much time is left again?
The end of the month, basically, 1st of July is the end of at midnight on the 1st of July is the end of the consultation period.
So by next week.
Basically, a week to go. It's
Right.
pretty important that happens. Okay, let's finish off with a bit of light relief here, because a couple of government appointments to let people know about. First of all, the Ministry of Defence has appointed its first female Chief Scientific Advisor, so this is good news. So Defence Secretary Penny Mordaunt has announced that Professor Dame Angela McLean is going to be the MOD's Chief Scientific Advisor. She's going to be the first female to hold the role, and joins the department as a distinguished academic with a commitment to science-driven policy. So that's fantastic. What's she going to be looking at? They're going to be launching pioneering space technology, improving body armor for personnel, and a life-saving test for sepsis. Apparently that's good stuff. So she's currently a senior research fellow at Theoretical Life Sciences at All Souls College at Oxford University, and previously held a number of other academic appointments, including a research fellow at the Institut Pasteur in Paris. So I couldn't think of a better person to do this job. She's very excited to be getting involved in the defence industry at last, and helping develop new defence technologies. And the wonderful Dame Sally Davies, our outgoing Chief Medical Officer, she has a new job as well. She is going to become the UK Special Envoy on Antimicrobial Resistance. Now, of course, she did literally write the book on this, and Dr. Graham Downing highlighted this in a presentation that he gave at a UK Column event, at least 5-6 years ago now. She wrote the book on this, on the fact that antibiotics are not working anymore. But of course, she's also the person that just last year made the point that the use of baby wipes was particularly effective when dealing with Novichok.
The deadliest nerve agent known to man.
Yes.
So we're told.
Yes. So although she didn't actually say what was on screen, I'm quite sure this is what she would have said if she had been asked by the UK Column. She probably would have said that microbial resistance is nothing to worry about. As with Novichok, the use of baby wipes is sufficient to deal with any microbial infection.
She possibly would have said that, right?
Possibly would have said that.
So it's not a direct quote, is it?
No. If we had asked her, that's probably what she would have said, or possibly what she would have said. So
slightly satirical there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Of course.
Don't want to get accused of putting fake news out.
Well, it is a bit depressing that you have to worry about these things in this day and age. But anyway, look, Dame Sally Davies has a new job, and she's going to be dealing with this problem. I do wonder if they're putting millions of pounds into this, which is what they say that they're going to do. Are they actually going to be developing solutions to this issue of antimicrobial resistance, or is this a cover for some more defence-related work, it's not absolutely clear.
Sure. In that position, what would be the top of your list in terms of your remit? Would it be to take on the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry, who are basically handing out antibiotics like Smarties? Wouldn't that be at the top of your list, right?
That would be the policy you might want to pursue, as opposed to what are they investigating?
So that's the question. Or is that at the top of their list? That should be the question everybody should be asking.
Yes.
In this case.
Right, we are totally out of time. Thank you very much for joining us today, Patrick. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back at the same time at 1 p.m. on Wednesday as usual, and Brian will be back then, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye.